A peer-reviewed DNA study published this past year ran the same test across every founding civilization on Earth. Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, Imperial Rome, Mycenae. 12 cradle peoples whose DNA had been pulled out of the ground in good enough shape to test against the modern people living on top of the same dirt today. 11 results came back the same way. Replaced, written over, moved through, and gone. Only one group on the planet still carries the DNA signature of the people who built its first cities 5,000 years ago. And it isn't the one most of us would guess. The work didn't happen in one lab. It happened across many of them, over the better part of 10 years. The Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, the David Reich Laboratory at Harvard, the GINA Archaeogenetics Group in Germany, the Center for Geogenetics in Copenhagen, Fudan University in Shanghai. Each team pulled bone bits out of museum storage drawers, ground them down, took what little DNA had lasted inside the dense bone behind the ear, and tested the old DNA against the people living in the same area now. The setup was simple. Find a group whose Bronze Age DNA was saved. Find the people living in that same place today. Run the test. See if the old signal still shows up in the blood. What nobody fully expected was that the answer would almost always be no. If you want to see more deep dives into the parts of ancient history that the textbooks quietly leave out, hit subscribe. We cover the DNA evidence, the buried tablets, and the lost civilizations every week. Egypt came back wrong first. In 2017, a team led by Verena Schunemann at the University of Tübingen, working with Johannes Krauss at the Max Planck Institute, pulled DNA from 151 mummies dug up at Abusir el-Malek in Middle Egypt. The samples ran from the late New Kingdom around 1400 BCE through the Roman period, a window of nearly 2,000 years of unbroken burial. The lab tested those old DNA profiles against modern Egyptians. They expected a clean match. Egypt has been lived in without a break for as long as the written record exists. The pyramids are still there. The Nile is still there. The farmers working the river delta today must be the children of the people who carved Karnak. The DNA said otherwise. Modern Egyptians carried roughly 8% more African ancestry from below the Sahara than the mummies did. The old profile sat closer to people of the Near East, of Anatolia and the Levant, than to the people living in Cairo today. The shift had mostly happened in the last 2,000 years, well after the Pharaoh-era civilization had ended. The Egypt of the pyramid builders had been a group with Near Eastern roots. The Egypt of today is a different mix, layered on top of it. That was finding one. Sumer came back wrong next. In 2011, a research team led by Nadia Al-Zahari of the University of Pavia tested Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA in the marsh Arabs of southern Iraq, the group most often named as the children of the original Sumerians. The marshes sit on the same delta where Eridu and Uruk once stood. If anyone alive today still carried the DNA line of the first city builders, it would be them. The team found a partial signal. Some Mesopotamian markers held on. But layered on top were heavy inputs from Bedouin Arab groups, Persian arrivals, and the centuries of upheaval that swept through Mesopotamia after Sumer fell. The original Sumerian DNA had not been kept clean. It had been watered down across thousands of years of conquest and resettling until what was left was a fragment, not a steady line. Finding 2. The Indus Valley came back worse. In 2019, Vagaheesh Narasimhan and his team at Harvard published a wide DNA study covering more than 500 old individuals from South and Central Asia, mapping the Indus Valley DNA through 11 people from sites on the edge of the Indus Zone. The same year, a separate study published in Cell by Vasant Shinde and his team tested the first individual from Rakhigarhi itself, one of the largest known cities of the Indus Valley civilization, which had built planned towns with drain and sewer systems before most of Europe had figured out how to make pots. The old Indus DNA looked like nothing in modern India. It was a blend of Iranian Stone Age farmer DNA and South Asian hunter-gatherer DNA with almost no steppe input. Modern South Asians, by contrast, carry a heavy load of steppe DNA brought in by the Indo-European movements of the second 1,000 years BCE, layered on top of the original Indus profile. The cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had been built by a group whose direct DNA children are now only a small trace in the gene pool of the region. Finding 3. Mycenaean Greece came back wrong in 2017. Iosif Lazaridis and his team tested 19 old DNA samples from the Bronze Age Aegean, including people from Mycenae itself, the walled fort that gave its name to the civilization Homer wrote about. The Mycenaeans, as it turned out, carried strong DNA from the Caucasus and the highlands of Iran on top of their Anatolian Stone Age roots. Their modern children in mainland Greece have been heavily changed by later Slavic and Albanian arrivals during and after the late Roman period. The DNA line is partial, not gone, not steady either. Finding 4. Imperial Rome came back wrong in a way that surprised even the researchers. In 2019, a team led by Margaret Antonio at Stanford tested 127 old DNA samples from the city of Rome and the land around it, covering 12,000 years of people living there. The DNA profile of the Roman Empire at its peak looked almost nothing like the Italians who live in the area today. Empire-era Romans carried strong Eastern Mediterranean and Near Eastern DNA, brought in by waves of slaves, soldiers, and traders from across the empire. After the empire fell, the gene pool shifted again, pulled back toward a Central and Western European profile by medieval movements of people. The Italians of modern Lazio are not the DNA children of Cicero's Rome, they are the DNA children of what came after. Finding 5. The Etruscans came back wrong in 2021. A study led by Cosimo Post at the Max Planck Institute and the University of Tübingen tested 82 people from central Italy from the Iron Age through the medieval period. The Etruscans had been one of the more puzzling groups in old Mediterranean history. They wrote in a language scholars still cannot fully read, built cities that came before Rome, and were in time swallowed up by the growing Roman state. The hope was that their DNA line had vanished in name but stayed in the modern Tuscan group. The DNA confirmed this in part. Iron Age Etruscans showed real continuity with modern Tuscans on the mother's line, but during the Roman Empire era, waves of slaves and migrants from across the empire shifted the gene pool heavily eastward and only partly came back during late antiquity. The Etruscan signal still sits in central Italy. It has been watered down, layered over, and partly wiped out, but not fully erased. Finding 6. The Hittites came back wrong. The Iron Age peoples of central Anatolia, the same group that built the empire that rivaled New Kingdom Egypt, have been studied through Bronze Age samples published in the 2020 Scortanioti paper, covering old Anatolian and Caucasus groups. The modern people of central Turkey carry some Anatolian Bronze Age line, but it has been heavily changed by Turkic peoples moving in from Central Asia starting in the 11th century. The Hittite DNA profile is a faint trace in the modern group, not a strong signal. Finding 7. The Minoans came back partial. The Bronze Age civilization that built the palace at Knossos, the people who painted the Leaping Bull frescoes and developed the still unread Linear A script, were tested by the Lazaridis team in the same 2017 paper that covered the Mycenaeans. Their DNA looked closer to Bronze Age Anatolians and the Aegean Stone Age. The modern people of Crete carry some of that ancestry, but the same Slavic-era arrivals that changed mainland Greece also touch the islands. The line is not unbroken. Finding 8. The Akkadians, the people who under Sargon built the first true empire in human history around 2300 BCE, leave only a faint DNA shadow. The modern peoples of Iraq and the wider Levant have been reshaped by Arab, Persian, Mongol, Ottoman, and modern arrivals to such a degree that pulling out the Akkadian-era signal is hard to do with the math. What can be pulled out points to heavy replacement, not continuity. Finding 9. The Carthaginians, the Phoenician colony that nearly beat Rome before being wiped out by it, leave a similar trace. The original Phoenician DNA profile, which the team led by Pierre Zalloua at the Lebanese American University has studied through both old and modern samples, shows up at low levels along the western Mediterranean coast. But the people of modern Tunisia, where Carthage once stood, have been fully reshaped by Arab, Berber, and Ottoman arrivals. The Carthaginian DNA is a fragment, not a line. Finding 10. The Olmec, the founding civilization of Mesoamerica, the people who carved the giant basalt heads at San Lorenzo and La Venta and laid the cultural pattern that the Maya and Aztec would later follow, are the hardest case. Old DNA recovery from the wet lowland places where the Olmec lived has been hard to do. Heat and wet air break down DNA fast, and the samples that have lasted are few. What has been pulled out, along with the wider Mesoamerican DNA record, suggests that the native peoples of southern Mexico do carry real continuity with the original Olmec-era groups. The line is partly intact. But the population disaster of European contact in the 16th century, which ended the lives of an estimated 90% of native Mesoamericans within a few generations, broke any sense of an unbroken civilization line. Disease, conquest, and forced labor removed most of the people who would have carried the passed-down cultural memory. The DNA line lives on in fragments. The civilization that carried it does not. Finding 11. Pay attention to this next part, because this is where the pattern breaks. Every single one of the groups described so far either lost the DNA line for good, had it watered down past the point of seeing it, or carried it through a population disaster so severe that the line itself could only be partly put back together. 11 of the 12 founding civilizations on Earth, in other words, do not have children in any real steady sense. The DNA does not lie about this. It has been checked, repeated, and published in scientific journals across many labs by researchers who had no reason to make up an exciting answer. And then there is the 12th. Take a second to think about the answer before I give it to you. Think through who actually built their first cities 5,000 years ago and is still standing on the same ground today, with their original language family still in use, their original main crop still grown, their writing system still alive, and most of all, their DNA still here. The answer is the people of the central Yellow River Basin in northern China. The people who, between roughly 5,000 and 3,000 BCE, set up the Yangshao culture and then the Longshan culture along the same river system, where the first dynasties of Chinese history would later rise. The same group that, with steady additions and small mixing in, became the modern Han Chinese. This is not guesswork. This is what the DNA shows. If you're getting value from this kind of detailed breakdown, hit the like button. It helps the channel reach the people who care about this material. I'll keep covering it. The work that built this finding began with two researchers, Melinda Yang and her senior partner Qiaomei Fu at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, who in 2020 published in Science a paper covering 26 old individuals from northern and southern China, and research groups at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, Jilin University, and Fudan University, which through 2024 added to that record with many papers covering the Yangshao culture, the Longshan culture, and the change between them. The data set has been growing every year since. The Yangshao culture began in the central Yellow River Basin around 5000 BCE. The people who built it were millet farmers. They lived in half-buried houses, painted their pots red with black shapes, and buried their dead in clusters near the villages. Their DNA profile, when it was finally pulled out of sites like Dahekan and Yangshaokan, formed a clear group on the DNA chart that scientists use to sort populations. It looked like nothing else in the Old World. The Longshan culture replaced the Yangshao around 3000 BCE. Longshan people built walled towns, made thinner black pots on potter's wheels, and laid the base for what would become the early Chinese state. When the labs tested Longshan-era people from the same Yellow River sites, they expected at least some break in the line. Cultural change of that size usually means people moving in. There was almost none. Yangshao to Longshan was a steady DNA line, with small southern Chinese mixing in around the edges. The Erlitou culture followed. The Shang dynasty followed Erlitou. The Zhou dynasty followed Shang. The Han dynasty followed Zhou, after the joining together under the Qin. Every change was tested. The 2025 paper out of Shandong tested 14 old DNA samples from the Wenshao base site, dating to the Western Han period around the 1st century BCE. The Wenshao people were the direct DNA children of the Yellow River Stone Age farmers, with only small added inputs from southern rice farming groups along the way. Modern Han Chinese in northern China share a core DNA base with the Wenshao people, which means modern Han Chinese in northern China share a core DNA base with the Yangshao farmers who painted the red pots 7,000 years ago. This is one of a kind on Earth. There is no other group living on the planet today that can be traced through old DNA in a steady line to the founders of its civilization, in the same place, with the same language family, the same main crop, and the same steady cultural identity. The Egyptians can't. The Sumerians can't, the Indians can't, the Greeks can't, the Italians can't, the Iraqis can't, the Turks can't, the Mexicans can't, the Tunisians can't, the Han Chinese can. What this means is something most of the field has been quiet about, because it cuts against a set of beliefs that old history is usually told through. The story we are taught about civilization is that it started in many places, that those places traded ideas and people back and forth, and that the modern children of those early civilizations are walking around today in the same general areas. The DNA shows that this last part is wrong almost everywhere. Most early civilizations did not produce steady, ongoing peoples. They produced ruins, displaced groups, and DNA ghosts. Only one of them produced an unbroken line. The reasons are still debated. Some of them are clear looking back. The central Yellow River Basin is shielded by its land. To the north lie the Mongolian Plateau and the Gobi Desert. To the west, the Tibetan Plateau. To the south, the Yangtze River system, which acted more as a parallel civilization path than as a fighting migration route. To the east, the Pacific Ocean. The area had natural walls that could be defended that the open Mediterranean, the funnel of the Indus, and the flat invasion paths of the Levant did not have. But land alone doesn't explain it. The Indus Valley had natural walls too, and it still got overrun. Mesopotamia sat between rivers and was overrun again and again by groups whose DNA signatures swept through and out, leaving little continuity behind. The other reason seems to be farming and cultural blending. When new groups did enter the central Yellow River area, they were repeatedly taken in by the dominant millet farming, then rice and millet farming group, rather than pushing it out. The cultural frame, including the writing system, the office system, and in time the empire idea, was strong enough to blend in new groups rather than be replaced by them. DNA continuity, in other words, was held up by cultural continuity and the other way around. The result is something the rest of the world's founding civilizations did not pull off. The people running the country today are the same people, in a real DNA sense, as the people who started it. The cities they live in sit on top of the same Stone Age settlements. The language they speak comes down, sound by reconstructed sound, from the language those farmers were speaking when they first planted millet in the Wei River Valley. This says nothing about modern political identity or about which civilization is better or worse. It says only that a fact fell out of a test nobody set up looking for it. 12 cradle civilizations were tested. 11 of them showed replacement, watering down, or break. One did not. There is a final layer to this that makes the contrast sharper. When archaeologists look at the original Yangshao village sites, they find signs of the same house layouts the Han would later make official. The same patterns of honoring ancestors. The same family structure that would become the base of Confucian family rules 2,000 years later. The same fermented millet drinks. The same red lacquerware ways. The same calendar tracking that would feed into the empire's star-watching office. The civilization didn't change. It grew in size. The people writing in standard seal script under the Han were doing it with the brains, hands, and DNA profiles of farmers who had been doing it in less complex form for 4,000 years. Compare that to Egypt, where the people who built the pyramids cannot speak to the people who farm the delta now, because the DNA line has been broken and the language has been replaced. Compare it to Sumer, where the cuneiform tablets sit unreadable to the people of the same dirt, because the group that wrote them is not the group that lives there. Compare it to the Indus Valley, where the script still cannot be read, and the people who would once have known it are no longer there to ask. The textbooks call these civilizations the foundations of human history. They are, in a real sense, also the casualties of it. There is one survivor, and that survivor is sitting on the same river basin, speaking a language that comes down from the language its founders spoke, eating crops that come down from the crops its founders tamed, with DNA that traces back through every dynasty without a break. The Sumerians left tablets, the Egyptians left pyramids, the Mycenaeans left walls, the Romans left aqueducts, the Indus Valley people left seal stones nobody can read. All of them left ruins. The Yellow River farmers left children. This is what the DNA actually shows. When you stop reading it through the belief that all old civilizations must have steady heirs, they don't. Most of them have monuments, and not much else. Only one of them has the DNA continuity the others were quietly assumed to have until the labs finally ran the numbers. The work isn't finished. New samples come out of the ground every year. The pattern could shift at the edges as more groups are tested. The Olmec story could change as wet place DNA recovery gets better. The Indus Valley story could change as more sites are tested. But the central finding is unlikely to move much because it has been confirmed across enough labs and enough sites that the signal under it is now seen as solid. 11 out of 12. And the one that didn't get replaced is the one most Western historians of antiquity have written least about. because the history writing tradition was built around the Mediterranean and the Near East, where almost nothing made it through in the DNA. The longest steady civilization on Earth has been, in a strange way, the one most often left out of the comparison. The DNA puts it back into the comparison, and once it's in the comparison becomes a story of survival, not just of where things started. The other 11 civilizations gave us the bases of farming, writing, math, star watching, city planning, and law. They were one of a kind. Their gifts are why the modern world looks the way it does. But the people who made those gifts are mostly gone. Their bones still come out of the ground. Their DNA still gets tested. Their children, in any unbroken sense, do not. Civilizations, the test suggests, are easier to build than they are to keep. The cities can outlast the people who built them. The writing can outlast the group that could read it. The farming can carry on under a new set of hands that does not share a single chromosome with the first farmers. This is the pattern across most of human history. It is the rule, not the exception. One civilization made it through. That fact is sitting in the data now, listed in dozens of scientific papers, confirmed across labs on 3 continents. Most of the people walking past it have no idea it's there. If you want to see more breakdowns like this, hit subscribe. We cover the parts of old history that the DNA record has rewritten, one civilization at a time. The video on screen looks at another case where modern DNA testing flipped a story the textbooks had been telling for 100 years. Click it.